on?
Looks like it, yes. Red button's going. Timer's going.
All right. All is good. Okay, everybody, welcome. Today's 28th of February, 2018. Erev Purim. Purim starts at sunset. Welcome. I wanted to spend a little bit of time. We will get to, hopefully, to the Mishnah, chapter 3, number 16. But in the meantime, I wanted to discuss a little bit about the holiday of Purim. So, if you have your timeline of Jewish history, I wanted to just show you where this is in terms of Jewish history. So, the holiday of Purim takes place right, if you go, you see where it says 500, minus 500?
Yes.
Go straight down to the bottom orange, and you'll see there's Esther and Mordecai.
Oh, yes.
Right? Okay. So where this is in terms of Jewish history is the first temple is destroyed. The Jewish people are not destroyed themselves. They are thrown into exile into Babylonia, which is modern-day Iraq. They end up staying there for a relatively short period of time before the Babylonians are overthrown by the Persians under the leadership of Cyrus. It's talked about in previous sessions. It's a bloodless revolution. Cyrus was a brilliant tactician, and he said to all of the people who were under the domination of the Babylonians, these guys are treating you like dirt. They've taken away your idols, they've taken away your religion, they've taken away our freedom. We're going to come in and we're going to let you practice your own religions. And sure enough, when they came, pretty much everybody in the Babylonian army said, sure, why not? And basically handed over Babylon. And sure enough, they opened up the sheds and they gave all of the pagans back their idols, and they let the Jewish people go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It was at that time that the Jewish people, many of the Jewish people stayed in Iraq, in Persia, for the same reason that most Jews don't make Aliyah today, even though it's never been easier to live in the land of Israel. The truth is we're comfortable here, we make a good living, we have our families, our friends, and so that most of the Jewish people still stayed in that land of Persia. That's where the story takes place. Jews settle in, they have a good life, etc. And so that's where you can see it's in the Persian period, right smack in the middle of it there, about 500 before the Common Era. The story of what takes place in that capital city of Shushan is contained in the Bible, of course, in the scroll of Esther, which is in the third section of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible made up of three component parts: the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. This is in the book of writings. The book of Torah and prophets follow a chronological order, basically from the creation of the world to the end of the prophetic period, pretty much an historical narrative. The book of writings is literary works that are interspersed would have been interspersed at different periods of time had they been put into the book of prophets, but are pretty much standalone works of literature, of which the book of Esther is one. There are actually 5 scrolls, 5 Megillot in the book of writings and the prophets, in Hebrew, and the book of Esther is just the most famous of them. Anybody know any of the others?
Go ahead.
One is the book of Ecclesiastes, which is read on Sukkot. This one, of course, Esther read on Purim. Another one of the Megillot. Anybody?
Ruth.
The book of Ruth read on Shavuot. Song of Songs read on Passover. And Lamentations read on Tisha B'Av. All of them, by the way, in Israel, very often still read out of a scroll, like this one. The one that we only think of as read out of a scroll is the book of Esther. This is the Megillah that we're going to read from here tonight. One of the interesting things about the Megillah, just as you're looking at it, it's written on the same kind of parchment that a Torah is written on. Written also by a scribe who uses a quill pen. The calligraphy is exactly the same. One of the biggest differences of it, though, obviously, is you can touch it with your hand and hit it on the floor. Why?
Oh,
Right. Why? Because God's name appears nowhere in this book of the Bible. Only book like that. And by the way, Megillahs come in many different forms. Years ago, I acquired, through an onset of circumstance, this Megillah, which is also a kosher Megillah. And I have one that's in between in size. Megillah, of course, easier to write than Torahs, because it takes a lot less time, and it tends that a sofer sort of works their way up. They start with mezuzahs, then they go to tefillin, then they go to Megillahs, and then finally, if they really work their way up, then they have a years-long project of writing a Sefer Torah. What makes it kosher? The calligraphy is good, and the words don't run together. It's it's legible, so this is just one of several that
How do they write something so small like that?
Yeah, it's just practicing. Mezuzah is a lot smaller, right? Tefillin's small too. These are just practice. It's actually harder to write larger than it is to write smaller, because the length of the straight line is what makes the calligraphy good. And the longer the line, the harder it is to make it straight. So the larger the letters, the harder it is actually to write them clearly. Micrography is very, very easy.
I was going to say in Scott, they have that.
But if you were to blow up those letters, you would see that they are not great calligraphy. But because they're so small, people don't pay attention to them. But because the larger the letters, the harder it is to actually make them. Because again, the straight line is what's most important.
Rabbi, does the Megillah have or all the Megillah for that matter? Do they also have like the crowns on them, or?
Yeah, they do have. Yes, they do have the same. They use the same scribal arts. That's a very good question. Yeah, there are several. In fact, if you Google writing a Torah, or you go to YouTube and you write writing a Torah, the #1 video is a woman who's. It's a very instructive video on how a Torah is actually written. I've used it many times in my class.
Would that be accepted in the Orthodox if a woman wrote it?
Is there instructions about which type of paper, ink, anything like that?
Yeah, but all of these scribal arts are very, very closely delineated. It has to be written with a quill. The quill is cut in a particular way. The ink has a very specific recipe that is used. The method for making corrections, erasures is all very, very closely documented and studied. Scribal arts are very challenging. You have to have both artistic and textual talent. Okay, the thing I wanted to point out with you, that I wanted to study with you a little bit today, is the book of Esther, because it is a story that we read as little kids. I don't know about you, but my mom always read to us a chapter of the Megillah when leading up to Purim, when she was tucking me and my brothers in. And she would sort of tell it in her own sort of way. But we grew up listening to the Megillah, knowing that Purim was coming, but that was our bedtime stories. As it turns out, it's not a children's story. And it's not, in fact, most of it's not even particularly appropriate for children, even though the holiday has been appropriated by kids. So essentially what this is a story about a reckless and impulsive man who comes to power. He rules based on whim, not on any great understanding of political systems or anything. He just, he's a populist. And he makes his decisions based on what will speak to his base, as it were, to the larger kingdom. And he therefore he then and I'll show you in the text. He is approached by a fellow who has been slighted by a Jew, and who then decides he's going to take it out on all the Jews. And so he appeals to the king with xenophobia. He says to the king, there's a group of people not like everybody else here, who doesn't follow your rules, and who is not assimilating into Persian society. They've got their own standalone, and it's not good to tolerate them here. I'll pay you to be able to get rid of them. And the king, because everything that he does is based on whim, including his choosing his wife. He's been through a number of wives, and he bases his selection in wife based purely on physical appearance, and he chooses his wife based on fashion, as we'll see in a moment, it's because of her uncle's knowledge of the king's sort of random approach to ruling that he convinces her to try out for the beauty pageant that ultimately will lead to her being a wife for the king. But she knows that her job is to just keep quiet and look pretty, and just be on his arm, because she knows what happened to the last one, who opened up a mouth to her, and refused to pander to him. And so she tries to do that until her uncle, who realizes what's going on there and learns about the plot against the Jews, puts her up to going before and revealing her true identity. And she demurs. She doesn't want to do that. And finally, she does agree, but she asks Mordecai to tell her uncle to tell the Jews to fast for 3 days before she does that, which is why to this day I'm fasting right now.
Me too.
The day before Passover is a fast because
Before Purim.
Before Purim, thank you. Before Purim. Also Passover too. Your first Purim like me, but yeah. But you're right, before Purim. As a result. And then the way that she actually pulls this off is an unbelievable lesson in using your wits, your guile, your good looks, your political connections, and understanding, most importantly, man's libido. And appealing to his ego and to his libido, she actually is able to turn the whole story around, and that's how the Jewish people survive. Intriguing, no? That's not a children's story. So let's take a quick look, and I will show you now textually what I just said to you in synopsis. So, and again, I'm just going to give you a few highlight verses here. So the story starts on page 3. And this is King Ahasuerus. It's he is
Thank you.
Ahasuerus is Xerxes. X-E-R-X-E-S is the actual thing. We call him Ahasuerus, and in Persian is Xerxes. Anyhow, so he is a king who fell into royalty. He was not a Cyrus. He was no great political leader. He was no great political strategist. He just happened to be, the right person at the right time, and he got, and he was given the kingdom. So one of the first things that he does after his in the 3rd year of his reign is he needs to now solidify his base. So what does he do? He throws a party on the top of page 5, verse number 5. He throws open the palace, and he invites into the palace his base, and that's why it says, and then when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people who were present in Shushan, both unto great and small. In other words, the rich and the poor, the mockers and the plebes. He invites everybody in the court of the king's palace, and he gives them their in verse number 7, drinks, and he serves them in vessels of gold, really showing them a good time, giving them, these are people who are not accustomed by and large to drinking out of gold stuff. He invites them in, and he says in verse number 8, and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. In other words, there was no law. The law was do whatever you want. Drink as much as you want. No one is going to compel. So for the king appointed all the officers of the house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. That's populist. That's right. Appeal, let everybody do whatever they want. I got plenty of wine. I got plenty of money. And my kingdom is, and I'm here for you. Drink up and have a good time. When then, at the height of the drunken party, he calls for his wife to come in and be, the arm candy entertainment, and look beautiful. And she says no, because she doesn't want to be, I suppose, manipulated in that way. And she, gives him a little flick, and says, "Don't touch me like that," right? And
didn't they say she had acne or something?
Well, it doesn't say that in the text. There is no acne in the text. She seems she seems particularly desirable. But but in verse number 12, Vashti refuses to come to the king. And so the king, and this is very important, the king, what would you expect him to do? He would make a decision. He would say, okay, here's what's going to happen. Either he gets angry and he says, off with her head, or he says, I forgive her, or whatever. No. He's a populist. He's doing it based on what other people are thinking about him. And so then, in verse number 13, then the king says to the wise men, which knew the times, for so it was the king's manner to all them that knew law and judgment. He asks them, what should I do? Right? What do you think is the right thing to do now? Then this is between him and his wife, and he throws it open to the discussion. What do you think I should do? In other words, what's going to boost my ratings? Right? And so they say, throw her out and have a beauty pageant. They know they're not saying, right? And that's exactly what they say. They say, have a beauty pageant, and we'll find you another bride. Just like, we know what you like, and we can handle this, okay? So look at verse number 19 on page number 7. So Vashti came no more before the king, and the king gave her royal estate unto another that is better than she. What does better mean?
Prettier.
Prettier. Exactly, prettier than she. Okay. As the story then commences, we meet Haman. So then she comes in and she works and she's in the harem. Okay. Now there's got to be a lot of competition in the harem. I mean, she starts out looking really pretty, but after a year or so, you see a lot of beautiful girls. So what she does, Esther, in verse number 15. On page number 9, is all of these women are having 12 months to get ready to, in verse number 12 it says, that when it was each maid comes in, it was her turn to go into the king of Ahasuerus for the night, after she had been for 12 months, according to the matter of women, doing all kinds of purification. She was using all kinds of perfumes and dressing, and whatever, she was like, give me my perfume, I know what I want to smell like. And she now has access to all of the riches in the world. It's like having, all of the French designers there at your disposal, and they're each picking and choosing, and they each get one night with the king. But when it comes to Esther's turn in number 15, verse number 15, now when the turn came to Esther, the daughter of Abigail, the uncle of Mordecai, taken for his daughter, was coming to the king, she required nothing. She has any Chanel she wants, any fine designer that she wants, but she required nothing but Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. Why? Why doesn't she just know what she looks good in? Because what's the keeper of the women's job? To make the women look good for the king. Who's been at this longer? Esther or the keeper of the women? Clearly, Hegai, the keeper of the women. So she says, look, don't tell me what the king likes, right? In other words, I don't trust my own instinct to go in and look so beautiful.
Is that smart of them?
It's incredibly smart, right? Exactly. You tell him, I don't want to wear anything except what you tell me. You know him best, and by the way, that of course, what does that do in terms of Haggai's loyalty to her? Right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Oh, sure.
Now he all of a sudden realizes he's the queen maker too. Doesn't hurt. Exactly. And by the way, if his job has been for an X number of years supplying her with women, supplying the king with women, he knows not only the taste, but he's also been around a long time. He's been around the block a few times. That's what she does. And lo and behold, guess what? She wins. Right? Yeah, surprise. Right, surprise. Right, exactly. She knows exactly, and she becomes, his favorite. Then the story takes a little bit of a sidebar in chapter number 3 where Haman comes in. And it's very, very arbitrary. Look at verse number 2 on page 11, chapter 3. And all the king's servants that were at the king's gate bowed and revered Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did show him reverence. So Mordecai didn't do anything except he ticked him off because he bruises Haman's ego. Haman has got a guy who doesn't bow down to him. And he vows revenge. And so, in verse number 7, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they, meaning Haman, cast poor, that is lots, before Haman from day to day, month to month, for the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. In other words, he decides he's going to destroy he's going to take revenge on all the Jewish people. How's he going to do it? The most arbitrary way possible. He has dice with numbers and dice with months, and he throws them, and whatever comes up, that's the day that is chosen. And that, throwing those dice are called Pur, and more than one Pur is called Purim. And that's why the holiday is called Purim, after the dice that were cast just as it's right here. That's what it says. It says, look, in the verse, the month of Nisan, the 12th, they cast Pur. That is the lot. Right? So they cast Pur. They used more than one, and it became Purim. Okay? And so, and on top of the next page, on 13, and Haman says to King Ahasuerus, now that he's got his day picked out, xenophobia to the max. Listen to this. There is a certain people scattered abroad, in other words, they're foreigners, and dispersed among your people in all the provinces of your kingdom. They've come in from abroad, but their laws are diverse from other people. Neither do they keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not in the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I'll pay you 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those in charge of your business to bring it into the king's treasury. Knowing that the king works on whim, he appeals to xenophobia. Xenophobia, by the way, doesn't only appeal to the king, but it appeals to the base. The same ones that he invited in for the whole party and all of that. He knows how, he doesn't have a horse in this game in terms of the Jews. He just knows it's good to have money, and it's good to have the support of the majority of the people. And if you scapegoat particular people, that rallies other people around them. And if you can specifically say they don't play by your rules, it's not fair to the rest that these people from outside can come and maintain their own identity in your kingdom and still live off the fat of the land. Let's get rid of them. That has some popular appeal. Always. Okay? So the king agrees to that and says, sure, right? This is not a guy who's thinking things through. It's not political policy. He has no high-minded values. It's expedient. Go for it. Sure. Why not? Mordecai gets wind of this and says to Esther, you got to go in and you got to stop this. We only have one person who's close enough to the king to be able to make a difference. Esther's response is, though, this king is basically a pretty fickle guy. And I was yesterday's girl, not today's. I haven't been with him in 30 days. We haven't had any kind of relationship, certainly nothing intimate, in 30 days. I can't pick somebody else. Mordecai says to her, no, you are the one to do this. And don't think that if you don't do this, Savior will come from some other place. It will. but you and your family may well die in the process. And perhaps, and look on verse 14 on page 15. And it says, for if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then there shall be a large deliverance from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will be destroyed. And who knows whether or not you had come into the kingdom for just such a time as this? You were born for this moment. How do you know that you weren't? I know that you weren't, essentially. Let's run to it. And so she says, okay, gather the Jews, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days in the next verse. And so then she decides to go in, and look at the top of this is where it gets great. The top of chapter 5, page 17. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel. Why? Why does it tell us what she's wearing? What difference does it make what she's wearing?
Part of her
Yeah, because she knows what he likes, right?
Yeah.
And she wants to make sure that he knows, by the way, I'm not like just any of these other ladies who come and go. I'm the queen. And remember what we once had. And if it doesn't remind you, look at me, right? But she doesn't go up. Now, you would think that she would then go up and sort of rub his cheek and play with his hair and be make nice, and try to use, a little bit of seduction. No. Not at all. She knows him better than anybody else. So she stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne, over against the gate of the house. In other words, they're sitting basically across the room from each other. She walks in the door, and he's sitting over there. He looks up, and Shazam, wow, right, wow. Right? And so it was that when the king saw Esther standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. You don't need to be Sigmund Freud to figure that imagery out. Right? This is not Kita Aleph in human school. Right? And the king says to her, what do you want, Esther? What's your request? Even if it's half your kingdom, I got to be with you. You're looking good. It's been a while, and I want to be with you. And he's desperate. He says, I'll give you half my kingdom. This is the way this guy thinks, right? It's very much whim. That doesn't matter. And look at verse number 8. She says, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition to perform my quest, let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow what the king has said. Now, if you're the king, what's weird about that?
Where did Haman come from?
Right. I don't know what you're into anymore, Esther, but this is just going to be me and you. And she says, no, I will give you what you want, but Haman's got to be there too. And he's kind of desperate. He's like, all right. And that, whatever it is. Then the story, this is a brilliant, brilliant story. Then in chapter 6, the story takes another sidebar in the narrative. And it cuts to a late night. The king cannot sleep. And he commanded to bring in chapter 6, on page 19, the king could not sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before him. He was going to fall asleep reading, yesterday's newspaper. And it was found that Mordecai had told Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, this is the beginning part of the story, the keepers of the door, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus, and Mordecai turned in two of the king's guards who were going to assassinate Ahasuerus, and they were caught and they were killed as a result. But the king hadn't really known about that. It was just something his deputies took care of. But they wrote it down in the royal edict. He now happens to be reading this, and he hears that this guy Mordecai, who he had not had any understanding of relationship prior to, but now realizes that Mordecai kind of saved his life, and he's and kind of an impulsive kind of guy. It's like, it's not that he's a bad guy. He has a good side to him too, and he just says, okay, this guy should be rewarded. Let's give him something. The king said, what honor and dignity, in verse number 3, has been done to Mordecai for this? And the king and the minister, the servant said, there's nothing to have done for them. Now remember, it's the middle of the night. He's trying to fall asleep. And he hears a noise out in the palace. And the king says, who is that in the court? I mean, this is 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever. He's been asleep, would have been asleep for a while. Who is in the court? Now Haman had come into the outer court of the king's house to speak unto him, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he prepared for them. But the king the king said to him, Haman stands in the court. Now, if you're the king, and Esther just told you what she said, that I can be with you, but only with Haman. And in the middle of the night, in his own palace, where the queen lives too, Haman is wandering around late at night. What do you think?
Something's going on.
No good.
Yeah, right. No good with Esther.
Yeah.
Right. Hey,
Hanky.
right, a little hanky-panky, and right, and shoe shot. Exactly. So, he's thinking, what's, that's odd. So then she brings in Haman, and he says to Haman, what do you think I should do for someone who I want to honor? And Haman, of course, thinks he's talking about him. He says, put him on a white horse, put the crown on him, and so he says, okay, do that for Mordecai. And Haman just goes, right, and he walks out, and he tells his wife, and his wife goes, you're an idiot. And at that point, the stage is set for the climactic moment in the story, which is chapter number 7. Here's where all those details come together. So finally, remember, the king wants to be with the queen. They haven't been together for a month. She's looking really good. She says, I'll be with you, but Haman's got to be there with me. He's a little suspicious, but he's like, whatever. And at night, he sees that the same guy is wandering around his palace late at night for no good reason. And now the moment has come to be with his Esther, but he also knows that Haman's got to be there. So the king and Haman came to a banquet with Esther the queen. And the king says unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine. Why the second day and not the first day of the banquet of wine?
By now he's
So
really
he's already
drunk.
drunk.
Right, by now, right, exactly. He's lubricated, let's say. Okay? And he says, what is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted to you. What is your request? And it shall be performed, even if it's half the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answers and says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and let my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. This is the first time she's letting on that she's a Jew.
Yeah.
What she ate in the palace, where she davened, is irrelevant to the story. Okay? But if we and this is, she's so smart, being so, it said, so manipulative. If we had only been sold as slaves, I would hold my tongue, and I wouldn't even ask the king to demand. I wouldn't even bother you if it was as trivial a thing as my entire people being sold into slavery. Because she also knows that he was pretty quick to dismiss them and sell them out for 10,000 pieces of silver. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther the queen, who is that? And where is he that does presume in his heart to do that? And Esther said, the adversary, the enemy, is the wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And then here's where the story all comes together. It's one unbelievable moment. And the king, arising from the bank in his wrath, banquet of wine again, he's out of sorts, right?
Tipsy.
A little tipsy. The king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. He's like, I got to think about this for a minute, right? What's going on here, right? I need a breath of fresh air. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed where Esther was. I know! I know! In the ancient world they have these change lounges. I mean, literally she's in her sleeping bed, but she's on a change lounge like they were. And he now has laid down, basically, prostrated himself in front of her. Right. And when the king comes in, what does he see? Then the king says, will he force the queen also before me in my house? And which literally means, will this man have his way with my wife while I'm in the house? Because last time at least he thought I was asleep there. And the word was sent out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face, and the rest is history. Haman and his family are destroyed. I know, isn't that an incredible story? I know. It is an incredibly rich, dense, not to mention topical story. And the reason, and I bring it to your attention for a number of reasons. First of all, because Purim seems to be just like this, Halloween, where we read a story and we do the grogers and everybody eats hamantash and it goes home. But what's this story really about? What is it, from your perspective, what's the story really about? And by the way, what it's not about, as I mentioned before, is it's not about God coming in and saving the dead. That clearly it's not. God does not appear in here. Israel does not appear in here. The Jewish law, devoid.
Each person can make a difference and take responsibility.
Okay, each person can make a difference. Good. What else? What else is the story about? Or to put it another way, how did a story that doesn't take place in Israel, has very little to do with the temple, sacrifice, worship, Jewish lineage, all the stuff in the Bible. How did this book make it into the Bible? Now, again, as I told you, it doesn't make it into the biggies. Certainly not Torah. It doesn't make it into the book of prophets either, although it could have. It's in the book of writings, which are these extra things that won by popular appeal. Everything that is in the book of writings was clearly some editor decided this is a story or this is a work of literature that has enduring worth. So that's how the book of Psalms, mostly written by King David, gets into the book of writings, even though the story of King David is in prophets. It's how King Solomon's Proverbs get into the book of writings, because they spoke to people. Song of Songs, it's a love story that King Solomon writes about women, gets in. Popular appeal. What's the popular appeal of this story?
You can win with wit instead of war.
Yeah, you can win with wit instead of war. It's a great way to put it. It's a very, very good way to put it.
You have Wonder Woman.
What's that?
Wonder Woman.
Yes, I just saw Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Even when the chips are down, it's in the lottery. Life is like a lottery. And it's up to us to make the effort.
Right, it's up to us to make the effort. In particular, again, I want to circle back to what Gloria just said, because particularly throughout Jewish history, we have never been the ones, except in the ancient biblical time, who had the mighty armies and the physical power, or even the political power, to determine our own destiny. How have Jewish people navigated the course of human history as being foreign people in a strange land, enduring 2,000 years of exile?
We have sechel.
Sechel. Exactly, by wits. Exactly, by wits. By being able to understand how the system works, who the players are, the way to change the situation, to reorient it so that it works out to the Jewish people's best interest, so that they can use the resources that they have and make up for the things that they don't have. And that's how this story got in. Because at that level, it speaks to all of us. And it does, as Robin Sue just said, it does say that everybody has the potential. Everybody has a certain amount of seichel. Everybody has an ability to look at things a little differently than other people do. And everybody also has a part in advancing the Jewish cause. Because it's not going to be done through might. It's not going to be done through military. It's not going to be done through power and political, or certainly through military power. It's going to be done through a Yiddish cup. And Esther becomes the paramount Jewish woman Yiddish cup. And she and Mordechai work together to create a scenario where Jewish people are able to triumph. And it becomes the paramount, one of the best expressions of what diaspora Jewry is all about. The only place in the world where Jews can determine their own fate through politics and through military power is Israel. But the vast majority of Jews, through the vast majority of history, until this very day, it's just begun to shift. There's about equal amounts now of Jews in Israel as there are in the rest of the world, which has never been done since the destruction of the temple. Through most of our history, we have been, the majority of our people have been the minorities in all of the lands that we found ourselves. And this story has a tremendous staying power for people who find themselves in that kind of a situation. And that's why the story has made its way into the Bible and continues to this day to reinterpret it in such a way that it speaks to the kids. Because if you think about it, there are amongst all of them, there are two holidays in particular, and only two, that are specifically geared to children. Only two. Not Hanukkah. Hanukkah is not geared to children. Hanukkah, kids like Hanukkah because they get presents. But there's no mitzvah. You should sit the kids down and tell them the Hanukkah story. Right. Passover. Right. And Purim. Purim is specifically geared to telling the story of how Jews can triumph in the diaspora. In a certain sense, the way the Passover story tells us how Jews can prosper when they get their own freedom in the land of Israel, which is the purpose of the Passover. And so that's why I think both of these stories are intensely interesting. I'm going to have to stop now. We have another 5 minutes till 1, but I have to go visit somebody who's very, very deathly ill in the hospital, and so I don't want to start into the Mishnah. We'll do that. We will do that next time. According to my calendar, we meet next week at this time. Is that your calendar too?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I think it's in
What day?
Next week.
It was written down as 8, but I think it must be.
No, it's all
Wednesday.
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 This week.
That's it.
Jim, you can push the red button.
Yeah.
Was on Wednesday.